For millennia, the Musqueam and Coast Salish peoples have lived on this land, working, learning, and passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. We are grateful to be able to continue that practice of teaching and learning together with them on their land. This is, I believe, the 21st Ipso Manwat Memorial Lecture. So it's one of the longest established and certainly the most significant annual series that we have here in Asian Studies, featuring prominent scholars, writers, and thinkers on topics related to China and the Sinosphere. In just a moment, my colleagues Raymond Pai and Zoe Lam will introduce this evening's distinguished speakers, Dr. Virginia Yip from the Chinese University of Hong Kong and Dr. Stephen Matthews from the University of Hong Kong. But first, I'd like to say a few words about this lecture series, which holds a very prominent place, as I said, in the department's annual calendar of events. The Asian Studies Department would like to express our profound gratitude to Mr. Alex Watt, Mr. Chisum Watt, and all the members of the Watt family, whose generous support has funded this lecture series in honor of Alex and Chisum's mother, Ipso Man Watt, honoring her passion and her dedication to Chinese literature and culture. The generosity of the Watt family has also supported our thriving Hong Kong Studies Initiative, our Cantonese language program, as well as making possible a host of classes, publications, lecture series, film screenings, and community events that have touched the lives of literally thousands and thousands of students, faculty, and members of the community. Now I'm going to turn things over to Raymond and Zoe, who will introduce our speakers. Thank you.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Virginia Yip. Professor Yip received her PhD in linguistics from the University of Southern California, where she met Professor Stephen Matthews. She founded the Childhood Bilingualism Research Centre at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and served as the chairperson of the Department of Linguistics and Modern Languages from 2011 to 2014. Her research focuses on bilingual acquisition, Cantonese linguistics, and child language development. Her work, including the numerous bilingual or trilingual child language corpora that she created, has made a significant impact on how we understand bilingualism in both academic and educational contexts. And on a personal note, it's really meaningful for me to introduce Professor Yip here. I was her student during my undergraduate studies at CUHK, and later had my first experience as a teaching assistant for her course, Linguistics 1000, Invitation to Linguistics. And today, I use her books as required text in my classroom, and I insist to show you these books. They're so beaten up by me. And her work has really played an important role in shaping me as a Cantonese instructor. It is not possible to speak about the impact of Professor Yip's scholarship without also acknowledging her long-standing collaboration with Professor Stephen Matthews. Together, they have written the award-winning monograph, The Bilingual Child, Early Development and Language Contact, and also the most comprehensive descriptive grammar books for Cantonese written in English. And now I would like to invite my colleague Raymond to introduce Professor Stephen Matthews.
Hello, 大家好. It is my great pleasure as well to introduce our second speaker, Professor Stephen Matthews, Emeritus Professor at the University of Hong Kong and co-director of the Childhood Bilingualism Research Centre at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Professor Matthews is a leading scholar in Cantonese linguistics, whose work on grammar, language contact, and bilingual acquisition has had a lasting impact on the field. Professor Matthews studied modern and medieval languages at Trinity Hall, Cambridge, before pursuing doctoral and postdoctoral studies in linguistics at the University of Southern California. His interests include language typology, language contact, and bilingualism. He has published on Cantonese, the grammar of Chinese dialects, and contact languages, including Chinese Pidgin English. His work with Professor Virginia Yip includes, actually, I think so, Ian kind of mentioned it, but I still insist of repeating that information. Includes the Cantonese Comprehensive Grammar, which appeared in a revised edition in 2011. And I have to hold this book in my hand because it also has some personal meaning to me. And as we just learned from the class visit at UBC a couple of days ago, they just announced a new third edition with Yip romanization is scheduled for 2028. 好意頭, right? Good omen. And the bilingual child, as Zoe showed, the early development and language contact, which received the Linguistic Society of America's Leonard Bloomfield Book Award in 2009. And one more interesting fact about Professor Matthews, he's also a musician, having played second violin with the Hong Kong Chamber Orchestra and the SAR Philharmonic, 香港愛樂團. I would also like to follow Zoe's example. I have one personal anecdote with Professor Matthews. I was an undergraduate at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, but as a biology major. To be honest, I was quite bored with my major courses. Meanwhile, I have always been interested in languages, that all my elective courses were language related. English, Italian, Japanese, Spanish, and translation. So one day at the university bookstore, I found Matthews and Yip's Cantonese and Comprehensive Grammar. This is the first edition. It's quite beaten up, but actually I checked it out from the library. Let's see, where was I? I was fascinated by the grammar of my own language, which was not properly taught in school. I think a lot of you might relate. Actually, not many people in this room know that I was a Mormon, also formerly known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints missionary. After college, and all foreign missionaries in Hong Kong, they studied from this very book. So you are also influencing a lot of modern missionaries, not from the old days. I was already familiar with the content that I became almost a tutor to all my fellow missionaries and community Cantonese classes in Hong Kong. So my lived experience with this book prompted my decision to go into linguistics, and eventually got my master's degree at Brigham Young University, and the rest is history. So even though I was never a formal student of our two guest speakers, they are indeed my mentors that totally had their hands on shaping my career, which brought me where I am here today. So finally, the presence of our honorable speakers is especially meaningful to our UBC Cantonese language program. May I? Yes. Just to give you a glimpse of what we did, these are also more recent photos as we are concluding our 10th anniversary celebration, a program that has grown from fewer than 100 students in the first year in 2015 into now nearly 1,000 students in our 11th year, the largest university Cantonese program in the world outside of Hong Kong and China, with a vibrant space for Cantonese language learning, research, and community engagement over the past decade. I would like to, just like Cheryl Lin, to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the Watt family, in particular Mr. Alex Watt and Mr. Chisum Watt, who we dearly miss, and his family, and the Department of Asian Studies, our lecturers, student workers, teaching assistants, students, alumni, and community partners and members who supported our programs in various ways and continued the legacy of the Cantonese heritage, which is close to our hearts. So now, without further ado, let us give a round of applause to our featured speakers today, Professor Virginia Yip and Professor Stephen Matthews. Thank you.
So hello everybody, greetings from Hong Kong, Chinese University of Hong Kong, as well as University of Hong Kong. So this is the topic, the Cantonese heritage and the heritage child. Raymond, Zoe, thank you very much for your lovely introduction. So it's a tremendous honor to be invited to present this year's Ipso Monwhat lecture. We'd like to acknowledge the Department of Asian Studies and the invitation from the department chair, Professor Charlene Orwell, and thank a number of friends and colleagues who hosted our visit. Raymond Pai and Zoe Lam are alumni of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and they're now running a very successful world-class Cantonese language program. And they both won the Pop Pedagogy Award last year. Congratulations. They've done us proud. UBC offers Canada's only comprehensive full-credit university-level program. There is no better place to learn Cantonese. So we hope to see the language program continue to flourish and become a global hub for learning Cantonese under their leadership. It's amazing to see the phenomenal growth of the program over the years with the support of the Watt family. And we thank the Soman Watt Cantonese Studies Endowment for supporting this lecture series, and especially thank the family members who are here today. And we'd also like to thank Molly Bagel, Doug Blank, Janet Weicker, and Patricia Patsy for their collegiality and warm hospitality. They are leading scholars in their fields, and we're especially impressed with their brilliant students' work on Cantonese and other Chinese languages. It is a treat to be part of UBC's vibrant academic community. There's no better place and no better time to visit than this week. Well, with the cherry blossoms and magnolia in full bloom. So we feel truly blessed and privileged to be here to celebrate the arrival of spring with you. So these are photos we've taken of the beautiful flowers to the spring in Vancouver. And spring is a season of hope and renewal. In this talk, we hope to present a hopeful and optimistic perspective. So along with the celebration of springtime, the Yip So Man Wat lecture this year is about Cantonese heritage and the heritage child. It's a celebration of Cantonese language and culture. So Vancouver is one of the top global hubs for Cantonese speakers outside of China. And Hong Kong and Vancouver had especially strong connections with a renewed influx of residents from Hong Kong in recent years. And Cantonese is enjoying a comeback. And we're here to promote the Cantonese heritage, the learning of Cantonese, and bringing up children as bearers of this heritage. So our title uses the term heritage in two different but related senses. First, we'll discuss the linguistic and cultural heritage of Cantonese speakers. We'll show how classic Chinese poetry still rhymes when read in Cantonese. We'll talk about some aspects of Cantonese tone and role it plays in Cantonese music, illustrated by the case of Canto Pop, sung by pop stars who are household names to Cantonese speakers. And we'll show how this heritage has become the object of nostalgia and concern over how it might be endangered. Then we'll talk about Cantonese as a heritage language, specifically how children in immigrant families develop and how knowledge of Cantonese can be transmitted from one generation to the next. Yeah. So Cantonese speakers take pride in several aspects of their language, beginning with the idea of Cantonese as an ancient language. By this, they mean that Cantonese preserves features of older Chinese, such as the checked syllables. These are known in Chinese or in Cantonese as yapsing, literally entering tones. They're syllables which end in an unreleased consonant, PTK. This is the sound in the word wok, which is one of several culinary terms that English has borrowed from Cantonese. In Cantonese, it's pronounced Walk with a K sound formed in the mouth, but not released. So walk, not walk. Similarly, Hong Kong's world-class airport is at Chek Lap Kok, or Chek Lap Kok in English. So these are final consonants that have disappeared in Mandarin. A special source of pride for Cantonese speakers is the way that ancient Chinese poetry still rhymes when read in Cantonese, even more than 1,000 years later. So one of the most famous poems which everybody has to learn in school is from the Tang Dynasty, which lasted from 618 to 907 AD. So this poem's name is Deng Gun Zhe Lao, okay, Climbing White Stork Tower by Wang Jiwen. So when I was a child, I had to learn this poem. I just wonder how many of you in the audience know this poem?
Say free.
Yes. Thank you. So this poem is saying that to have a broader view, you need to stand higher up and ascend to a higher level. So it's a very elegantly written poem. And I'm going to play this audio for you. This is recited by a child. And let's pay attention to the highlighted words at the end of the second and fourth line. So you have the word lao. So tone 4, low falling, and then in the fourth line, also lao. So the first lao refers to flow, and the second word, the last word in the fourth line refers to another floor. So that is another level. So let's have some poetry reading appreciation.
白日依山盡，黃河入海流。欲窮千里目，更上一層樓。
So it's rather remarkable that this poetry still rhymes after 1,500 years. If we read English poetry from 700 years ago, like Chaucer, most of the rhymes no longer work. Even in Shakespeare from 400 years ago, a lot of lines no longer rhyme as a result of sound changes that have taken place since Shakespeare's time. Okay, so here's the same version but read in Mandarin. So what I want you to notice is that the same words, same characters no longer rhyme.
白日依山尽，黄河入海流。欲穷千里目，更上一层楼。
Okay, so the characters are read as liu and you, and they no longer rhyme. So how's, right, so what I want you to show is that the poem, so Cantonese is more conservative than Mandarin. So many Cantonese sounds are closer to the language of the town poets. So while there's some truth to the idea that the town poetry rhymes best in Cantonese, there are some overly general statements that need to be clarified and fine-tuned. So here are some examples that we've come across. So one popular idea is that the Cantonese we speak today is just like the language of the town poets. But this can't be the case because Cantonese has changed greatly over the 1,500 years or so since the Tang Dynasty. A more precise way to look at it is that Cantonese is phonologically conservative, meaning that it is relatively close to the language of the poet's time in terms of pronunciation. So similarly, Cantonese is sometimes called a living fossil of Middle Chinese. But the concept of fossil is not quite appropriate because Cantonese is living and continues to change. It's just changed less in this particular aspect of Mandarin and other varieties of Chinese. So to learn Cantonese is to learn an organic, ever-changing language. Finally, there's the idea that town poems do not rhyme correctly in Mandarin, but they do in Cantonese. Well, naturally, some rhymes still work in Mandarin and some don't work in Cantonese. But taken as a whole, the percentage of lines that rhyme is higher in Cantonese or in other conservative dialects such as Minamha.
Here's another example that makes some of these points. So this is the poem Singing Goose by Law Bing Wang, also from the Tang period. And with this one, I was hoping to get a bit closer to the actual sound of the poem, because the name of the goose is clearly onomatopoeic, is something of what the goose says. What the goose says actually depends on the species of goose, but this is the snow goose, which you may have seen on over a marine drive or at Richmond if you live on the west side of Richmond. So in Mandarin, the goose goes and that rhymes with "ku shang shang tian ge." And in Cantonese, it goes "ngọ ngọ ngọ," which to me is a bit closer to a goose sound, but it does depend on the species of goose. So based on that, so that does rhyme with "ko ong heng tian ko," and it also rhymes with the last line of the poem. And so that's a case where in Cantonese clear the lines rhyme, and that's a typical rhyme scheme for Tang poetry, AABA. And as Virginia said, it's not that the Mandarin never rhymes, some of the Mandarin rhymes and some of it doesn't, right? So it may be tempting to say, the original sound was "ngọ," but not so fast. If we ask the experts what was the Middle Chinese pronunciation of goose, they will say, it was "nga." Well, how do they know? What's a long story? But in this field, historical linguistics, the asterisk means that this is a reconstructed form. It's a guess, the best guess, right? So if the experts are right about that the Middle Chinese pronunciation for goose was "nga," then in a sense, neither Cantonese nor Mandarin preserves the sound of the Tang poetry, right? Which isn't necessarily the case, as Virginia said. But you could still argue that the Cantonese is closer to the reconstructed Middle Chinese form, right? Because particularly preserves the sound onset. We call we write in NG. So one thing that the various romanization systems for Cantonese agree on, right, is that is written that way. They don't agree on anything else, unfortunately. So that's a case where there is some, as Virginia said, the Cantonese is closer to the assumed pronunciation of the poet's time. Apart from the pronunciation, there were some interesting pieces of the Middle Chinese or the language of the Tang poets in the vocabulary. Right? So this is another famous poem, Li Yu, in which it begins "Man guan lang yao gei duo sao." This is right in Cantonese. That's what you get. And what is gei duo sao? Well, it corresponds to the modern Cantonese gei duo, meaning how much or how many. Right? As in, how many times have you been here? It's exactly the same expression and basically the same same meaning. Less well known is that there is some Chinese, conservative grammar in Cantonese reflecting properties of the Tang era. So another famous poet, Du Fu, once wrote, well, you didn't say that, but if you conventionally we write these things in pinyin, that's what you get. And what's he using? Well, he's using the word zhang, something like the Mandarin right? So it's a construction in which you put the object before the verb, sort of basic, basic or intermediate Mandarin, that you learn to use that with various constraints. But in Cantonese, if you look in our book, then you have to learn to use. If you're in Hong Kong, you basically can't use ba. It is actually quite an interesting fact because most features of Mandarin can be used in spoken Cantonese, right? If you're being formal or something, it's almost impossible to use ba, or if you did, you would be basically saying, I'm just off the boat, right? Or just off the train from the mainland if you did that, right? So it's one of the things that I assume you're taught not to say in Cantonese, is to use ba in Cantonese, but you need to learn to use the word zheng instead. And actually this is quite tricky because the way I see it, the way we use zheng in Cantonese is something like a subset of the way you use ba in Mandarin, and you have to learn what is the subset. It's quite tricky. Quite difficult to describe, as we found out. But anyway, the example for our grammar, which we rather like, is so taking old-fashioned stuff as trendy, which we're going to see happens a lot in Hong Kong, right? Happens at the moment. So this is a correspondence, if you like, in the syntax between the language of the Tang poets and today's Cantonese. We use Tang or Zhang for this purpose. Another thing that the cultural tradition that, as we see, Hong Kong Cantonese speakers are proud of is their vocal music traditions. Here, there's a particular relationship to the tones of the language. So my students have found this perhaps surprising, but it's a little surprising to me that there was so much continuity between the Cantonese opera tradition, the cantopop tradition, and even modern vocal music by sort of modern classical composers writing vocal music in Cantonese. And there's a sense in which they're all following the same rules. Right? And it's a bit like the rules of Cantonese grammar. Nobody teaches them overtly, but you absorb the conventions, so I call it the rules conventions of the matching of tone and melody. And there were various clues that the speech comes first, right? So the early forms of Cantonese singing, the melody is somehow inspired by the tones of the lyrics, right? You can see that happening in Cantonese opera. For cantopop, according to the lyricist, it works both ways. So you can take a poem and set it to music appropriately, or you can write a melody and try to find words to fit it, which is probably more difficult, but the lyricists say they do both, they work both ways, right? And into the modern era, we have composers like Chen Kaiyuan here at Chinese University, is very much an active composer, and he has just produced an app for your phone, which is the Cantonese melody generator. You can just download this, you can do karaoke and so on. And what you do is you type in your lyrics, and it produces a possible melody for your lyrics, which, as we'll see, is actually very difficult. So it's a very helpful tool to give you that. But again, he's taking the lyrics, the way he works is to take the lyrics and generate a melody to match it, which historically is the main way it goes. Right? So why is this so important? Cantonese, well, many languages have some such connection between the prosody of the language or the tone system of the language and their singing and musical traditions. But the Cantonese one is particularly sophisticated and developed and complex. I've had lots of students write theses about this, and I wouldn't say they're scratching the surface, but each of them sort of masters a little area, a little subset of this problem, right? No one of the theses has given you the whole picture because it's too complicated. It's a bit like saying Cantonese grammar. Can you write a thesis on Cantonese grammar? Well, no, you can write a thesis on the German construction of Cantonese grammar or tone sounding Cantonese or something, but you can't really write a thesis on Cantonese grammar. It's too complex, right? And the same is true for the topic of the relationship between tone and melody. So why is this so important in Cantonese? Two good reasons. One is from Patrick Wong, who I believe is coming to visit shortly. Patrick Wong, Chinese University, a neurolinguist and cognitive scientist working on language. And I think this was back in his PhD days that he did this work on Cantonese vocal music. And they argued and did some experiments showing that, well, there has to be a correspondence between tone and melody, because if there wasn't, lots of the lyrics would be unintelligible, right? Because there are 6 tones, right? There would be so many possible homophones given a particular syllable that if the music is not giving you a clue to which word is intended, then much of the lyrics are not going to be intelligible, especially if we consider the nature of cantopop lyrics, which is another issue. So conventionally, the cantopop lyrics are literally Cantonese. They're a little more like poetry than spoken Cantonese, right? And that makes it particularly difficult for me, for example, to recognize the words of the songs, right? So that's one aspect. But there's also the aesthetic aspect. So the matching of tone and melody has come to be one of the things that people appreciate in cantopop. So, this is another of my student of mine who's now a professor at Chinese-U, Zhang Wenying. Yes, Zhang Wenying. And she has a thesis about that, if anyone wants to read it. We don't have time to go through the thesis today, so instead we've gone to a blogger who is obviously a cantopop enthusiast online. You haven't been able to find out who Gundam is, but Gundam is a blogger very keen on cantopop, right? And he says that the 9 tones and 6 contours, so the 6 tones we're going to talk about become 9 if you include those checked syllables we had earlier in the word walk, and those closed syllables that make up 9 tones. And together, these, for Gundam, are a scale tuned by God, that God-given system. And he's got this comment, which I think is quite insightful, the rich tone system enables Cantonese to express fine emotion with precision, properties of which are manifested in cantopop, Cantonese opera and poetry. So if you like, that's what Ms. Chow was saying in her thesis. It's just not so complicated. And the way I see it, there were properties of the music which would really derive from the Cantonese tone system itself. And again, to try to give you a picture of some of that without getting too complicated, right? So let's look at the Cantonese tones. This is a very phonetic, acoustic representation of the 6 tones of Cantonese. I say standard Cantonese because when you teach the 6 tones, right? If you teach your pen, then you do have 6 tones. Naturally, there's variation, as in all languages, and particularly there is some merging of these tones. So some speakers basically have a 5-tone system. Some speakers even have a 4-tone system. And according to Fung Sok-Yi, one of our colleagues, it's the trendy young girls who have the most trendy system, and as they always do. And some of the trendiest girls have a 4-tone system with an innovative rising tone. So another part of the story. Let's not go into that today, but just to acknowledge that there is that kind of variation. So the way this works, this is the pitch track from the beginning of the syllable to the end of the syllable. It's about half a second long, which is seconds here, so half a second long. And it's very striking that tone 1, the high tone, as in Guo, Chengguo Song, is very distinct from the others. But if you look at the last 4 tones on the bottom, they're much the same, right? How are they even distinguished? They've got 4 different tones, which for the first half of their duration are almost identical, right? So this is a puzzle. And then what happens in the second half of the duration, the duration of the syllable, they diverge, right, dramatically. Well, not dramatically, but significantly, right? So these are the 2 rising tones, from 2 to 5. This is what we call the low level, this is what we call the low falling. And yes, they are different, but they're only different at the very end, really, that they're distinctively different. So this is often described as having a narrow or clouded tonal space, particularly for those last 4 tones. at the bottom. Consequently, in perceptual phonetics and phonology, what's distinctive is the ending point of the tone. So you have to be using an end point. And this was something that was noted in perceptual experiments by Walter Chocker and his colleagues. Walter moved from Hong Kong to UBC. And we're going to see that that's significant, very significant for the mapping of tone and melody in music. A little bit more technicality that we need. So that was what we just looked at is the very acoustic information about the tones. How do we represent the tones? Well, we simplify that somehow, and these numbers, how many people know about these numbers? There's maybe about half the people know about these numbers. These numbers are used in Chinese dialectology to represent the trajectory of the tone or the contour of the tone over time. So the 5/5 tone means it starts at the top of the scale, level 5, and the 5/5 tone starts at level 5 and ends at level 5. So it's a 5/5 tone, whereas the second tone starts down here, what we call level 2, and rises sharply to level 5, and so we call that the 2/5 tone. And so on for the other tones. We're going to need that. Notice that we have this bifurcation thing that I showed you just now, and it represents it very clearly here. This was a point made by Bauer, who's going to appear a few times today, Robert Bauer, the sociolinguist and phonologist. He would insist, I think correctly, as far as Hong Kong Cantonese is concerned, except for the trendy girls who are the new tone, but let's set them aside. If there's any trendy girls want to argue with me, think my daughter will start arguing with me later. Some of them have an innovative 3/5 tone, which would be different, of a different symptom. For nearly all studies of Hong Kong Cantonese, you find that the two rising tones begin at the same level and rise to different levels. So again, it's the ending of the tone that's distinctive. And so you get minimal pairs like Chang, to want to go, versus Chang, to go up. And if the sounds are much the same to you, then you're in good company. Second language learners like myself have great difficulty distinguishing these tones, and would often misproduce them or confuse them in production or comprehension or both. And a similar problem with the T4 and T6, which is low falling and low level. So sun, it's got sun, is kidney, and again, they can sound much the same. And in fact, the tendencies to merge tones, there are various ways that you can merge tones, but some speakers merge those two, some speakers merge those two, and so on. It's complicated. I don't want to talk about merging today, but just to acknowledge that it exists, so it's another thesis topic if anybody wants one. So again, all of these cases, it's the end point or the offset pitch that's distinctive here. And now for the interesting point, I think a very interesting point, only the offset pitch, that is, in this numbering system, it's only the second number which is relevant to the mapping of tone and melody, right? And some of you already look interested at this point. When my students pointed this out, I was a little bit reluctant. They said, oh, the first part you can completely ignore. And I said, really? Yes, they all say the same thing. So I think that's very significant, and it means that the Cantopop system of matching directly derives from a property of the acoustic tones that we started with, which is that it is the endpoints of the Cantonese tones that are distinctive, and it's exactly that's driving the correspondence between tone and melody, as we'll see. Yeah. So, this is one demonstration of that point. So this was discovered by Professor Marjorie Chan, not a pop star, but a star professor, very popular in the Cantonese world, and actually from Vancouver herself. And Marjorie discovered way back, I think it was the first conference I went to at Berkeley in 1987. I struggled to understand, but it was fascinating with Marjorie talking about cantopop. And what she discovered was that in a Cantonese pop song, this tone or this tone or this tone are equivalent. And this tone or this tone or this tone are equivalent. I mean, you can substitute them in your lyric writing and acting. So you can substitute any of these tones for each other, and nobody cares. The sound song will be equally good, right? So that's what she discovered, and her generalization was the loss of pitch contour means that the tone melody mapping doesn't even use the tone contours of the language, which is quite surprising, not at all obvious. You might think it would be precisely the tone contours, the rising or falling contours that would generate the melody, but it isn't, right? So it's not obvious at all. It's even quite surprising. What matters is that the target pitch level is a pain, so it's the ending at level 5 that counts. The mapping, the matching of tone and melody is based on the target pitch levels, as Marjorie puts it, the pitch which is reached at the end of the syllable. It's a bit abstract, so let's have some cantopop. We're going to Techniques on Asian Chan, and this is a song, in which he has interchanged the tone, or his lyricist has swapped out some tones. So the first verse, the first one we're going to hear, goes do what and the second verse that we're going to hear goes 都有些幾定路程, right? So there are 3 differences there, and again, if you didn't know how this works, you might think that a high rising tone and a high level tone would be very different in terms of the way they fit into songs, but no, they're not. They're exactly the same, right? And so this is surprising. It's not only surprising to us if we haven't thought about this before, it's extremely puzzling for phonologists. Have we got any phonologists? No, yes, we have a phonologist. I don't know if Zoe has a view on this, we haven't discussed this yet, but there is a nice quote from Moira Yip, who is a Yip who is, she's married to a true child person called Yip, and she has a comment that her theory is completely at a loss to explain why these tones are interchangeable in the tone mapping. And what's wrong with her? Well, I don't know how she's revised it, but at that time, the reason she was puzzled was that her phonological representation was based on the beginning points of the tone and not the end points of the tone, right? So, so this is a puzzle for phonologists as well as others, right? So one verse is using this set of tones, the next verse is using these set of tones. So it's the same melody. Basically looking at these 4 notes, if you're a musician, right? Or even these 3 notes. Or we can look at the whole phrase, which the verses, those different tones are interchangeable from one verse to the next. There's one more point you can see if you read the musical notation. If you look at the second bar here, if you're starting with this point, this A, then the tone sequence, again, if you ignore the onset and you only look at the ending point of the tone in red, then the sequence 5, 3, 2, 2, 1 matches the direction of the melody, right? But it only matches if you ignore the beginning point of the tone and focus on the end point of the tone. So finally, let's get some music. These are the 2 verses.
故事假使短過這5月落下，沒有需要檢查。
Then the second verse is over here.
於是彼此都有些既定路程，學會灑脫。
So that was the second verse, Lord Teng. So the melody doesn't change, but the tones do. And what doesn't change is the sequence of tonal targets in terms of Marjorie Chen's discovery.
Good note.
Okay. Another factor in the matching, so what we just looked at in the direction of the melody there was one aspect, but that's not all. There's also the question of how far the notes are separated from each other. What is the musical interval that matches the tone intervals or matches the distinctions between the tones? And the way this works in music is that a musical interval, such as a fifth, is defined by a frequency ratio. The reason a fifth is perfect is it's 1.5 to 1. It's very mathematically beautiful. And similarly, you can a major third is basically defined as a ratio of 1.25 to 1, and so on. So those are the musical intervals. But what about the tonal intervals? Well, we can do this with level tones, and we can find that, for example, the pitch ratio between the tone 3 and tone 4 is 1.28 to 1, so that's very close to the musical ratio for a major third. So we therefore expect to find this pair of tones used to match this interval in the music. And basically, this is where one of my students, Suki Hiu, she spent some time here. Does anybody know Suki? Suki spent some time. Yeah. Philologist who spent some time here, now teaches in Amsterdam, teaches philology there, and I think I persuaded her to do this study as a kind of, what do you call it, side project, yeah. It was rather neat. So she worked out these correspondences, and as you can see, it gets quite complicated, but I just want to focus on the red one. So the question is, is there a match? So for the perfect fifth in music, the interval is 1.5 to 1. For the difference between these tones, in terms of frequency, in Suki's work, it came out as 1.54 to 1. So we think that's close enough to be a match. So let's see if it is. So in other words, we were expecting that there will be a tendency for, let's say, if you write these lyrics with those two tones in succession, then we expect the music to go down a fifth or up a fifth, depending on the order, right? This is what we have. Anybody know this song? Danny Chan. She's getting nostalgic, as we'll see. Hold on, let me just cite the first, it's okay. So it's nostalgic for me because this is like the first song I heard when I arrived in Hong Kong in 1989. It was everywhere on the airwaves. Here the Chinese notation is useful because of the numbers. This is the Chinese music notation. How many people understand the Chinese music notation? Okay. Some do. So the Chinese music notation means that the 5 is the fifth note of the scale, and the 1 is the first note of the scale, the keynote. The music goes, there was a fifth between those. It's from a D to a G in G major. And notice that this is set to exactly the tone pair we were expecting just now, so tone 1 to tone 4. And that makes sense given Suki's discovery that the interval is very close to a perfect fifth, right? So this is a falling melody. The melody falls from 5 to 1 in the Chinese notation, example, Jinbu, and falls from D to G in the Western notation. And that fall of a fifth matches the fall in pitch from tone 1 to tone 4. Right? If we try to turn it around, could we have the melody being a rising fifth? How does that sound? pretty bad, right? So like, I think I failed. So that's not very surprising. But maybe what's a bit more surprising is that, according to my students' intuition, the melody here cannot be 5-5-3-3. It would be a 4, but it wouldn't be enough of a 4. It wouldn't be a big enough 4 in music to match the big difference between these tone categories, tone 1 and tone 4, high level and high falling. Right? So it's just one example. As you can imagine, it gets much more complicated, and there are exceptions, but this is a clear example of the kind of match that we were expecting, given the equivalencies that Suki set up between musical and tonal intervals. So let's hear this. It's time for there's a lot of technical stuff. Time for a break, so let's hear my favorite song, that Sang Ho Kao. It's often translated as "What is life for?" but we really need a more poetic version of that, more poetic in Chinese.
冷暖那可休？回頭多少個秋？尋遍了卻偏失去，未盼卻在手。我得到沒有？沒法解釋得失錯漏。剛剛聽到望到便更改，不知哪裏追究。 一生何求？常判決放棄與擁有，耗盡我這一生，捉不到已跑開。一生何求？迷惘裏永遠看不透，沒料到我所失的，竟已 是我的所有。 回頭多少個秋，尋遍了卻偏失去，未盼卻在手。我得到沒有？沒法解釋得失錯漏。剛剛聽到望到便更改，不知哪裏追究。 一生何求？常判決放棄與擁有，耗盡我這一生，捉不到已跑開。一生何求？迷惘裏永遠看不透，沒料到我所失的，竟已
Okay, I want to stop there because it's going to make another point. Notice that the verse ends on soyao. So what is this? This is a tone 5 with a 2-3 contour. So remember, the 2 doesn't count; it's only the end point. 3, the middle of the scale, or the middle of a tone scale, that comes to rest at the middle of the scale and not at the bottom of the scale. Now, it just reminds me that a lot of you are learning Cantonese, right, or teaching Cantonese. You'll have noticed that every year there is a musical approach to Cantonese. There are lots of attempts to produce a musical approach to Cantonese. And in my experience, they all fail because they're far too simplistic. Right? So, I mean, for example, we might expect, I think they do expect, they treat the tone 4 or the low 4 as the bottom of the scale. So, knowing a little bit about music, you might think, okay, the bottom of the tone scale will be the bottom of the music scale, right? But that's completely wrong. Basically, all of the musical approaches to Cantonese that I've seen get it badly wrong. Some of them occasionally get something right, but you need, though this is an interdisciplinary topic, it's extremely hard to state. I had at least 3 students write theses on this, and I say that each one has grasped a part of the picture, right? And I'm not saying I'm not an expert at all. In fact, I'm not good at this at all because I don't have the intuitions, right? So it's fascinating that my students, probably not just students, but you guys are most consumers of Cantopop, have very clear intuitions about what is a good match, what is a possible match, and what is not. And sadly, I don't have those intuitions at all, right? So all I can do is to try to help the students work out what they're doing and point out when their system doesn't work, right? But I want to teach you one more thing. The interesting point here was that it doesn't end at the bottom of the tone scale. It ends at the bottom of the musical scale, but it ended in the middle of the tone scale. Why? Well, one of my brilliant students worked this out. So let me try to explain. Here's another piece of Liming. Anybody remember Leon Liming? We're not going to play him because, unfortunately, he's known as the the king of being out of tune, the out of tune king. So we're not actually going to play him, but his tune is quite helpful to our case. So let's look at a little bit of his song. First of all, notice that the sequence of the music matches the sequence of the tonal targets, and I think you can see that even if you don't know much about music. This comes down and then up again, and then again a little bit about music, you'll recognize that this is the keynote because we're in C major and we're ending on C, as you expect. So this is again the end of a verse, and this matches. So you see the order 5, 3, 2, 3. Matches the relative pitch of these notes, right? So that's what we call a perfect match in terms of the sequence of tonal targets, right? But there's another interesting point which I want to try to explain, and that's once again the melody comes to rest on the keynote C, but the lyrics come to rest on the midpoint of the tonal scale with a 3-3 word. So it could be moi, love, or it could be, because they, remember 2-3 and 3-3 are interchangeable, so it could be moi, love, or it could be nei, right? And this is very convenient for love songs. Like most of these are love songs, so it can end in moi, it works perfectly, or it can end in nei, or even moi, and it works perfectly. So with that's convenient, but that's not the explanation. The explanation is more interesting. And this is the same song with a bit more analysis. As long as we're in a major key, then the songs in major key are going to end on tone level 3. So it could be a 3-3 as in my love, or it could be a tone 5 as in nei, still with the 2-3 contour. But crucially, both of these have a mid-level offset point, right? Which is in the middle of the tonal scale we had before, right? This corresponds to something in music. If you remember your grade 5 theory, I mean, Chinese people have all done grade 5 theory because they were forced to take the music exams, right? So you have to remember your grade 5 theory here about the semitones. Major keys have a semitone between the leading note and the tonic or the keynote, right? So between the B here and the C is only a half tone, like a small interval, the smallest interval in Western music, right? Is this Western music? That's a complication, but we can give that in discussion if you like. Treating this as if it were Western music, which is, but I'm simplifying that. The major keys that you learned in your theory exams have this semitone between the B and the C. Or if you learn this notation from the sound of music system, it's from T to Do, right? So far. Now, the question is, where in the Cantonese tone system do you get a semitone, right? And in Matsumi Suki Yu's side project, you don't quite get a semitone, but the closest you get to a semitone, the narrowest tonal interval in the language, is the interval between tone 6 and 3, or between level 2 and level 3 on the tonal scale, on the pitch scale, right? So this is also a match, right? So the reason it pretty much has to end on pitch level 3 is that immediately beneath the P note is the leading note, which is semitone down, and in this case, he's actually singing the leading note. He doesn't have to, but it's even more interesting when it's not there, but it's still implied. It's implied in the harmony if you follow me musically. So this is the pattern, and notice again it makes it quite difficult to write the lyrics because you basically have to finish on your song either with a tone 3 or a tone 5, as long as it's a major key. If it's a minor key, it gets much more complicated, and we'll be here till about 10 o'clock this evening trying to work it out. So let's set aside the minor keys. But for the major keys, this is very clear, and another great student of mine, Jackson Lee, did a project where he showed that this generalization here, that the major key songs have to end, they don't have to, but they end on these tones, this one or this one, it's about 94% true. Whether the generalization is very strong. I've got the figures in supplementary slides if anybody wants to see that in the discussion. This is a very strong correlation. And it's just the best. For these very reasons that I've tried to explain, it is the best way to finish a song or finish a verse, which is kind of the same thing musically. Yeah. Okay, and this was discovered by Ho Wing-si, who was teaching French and doing a PhD on this at Hong Kong Yip. Sorry. Right, so enough technical stuff. Some more fun stuff. This is very new, right? It was like last week's news, right? And in fact, it was very recently that we were taking a minibus in Hong Kong, and they were playing these songs. Oh, I haven't heard that song for years. Where did they get that from, right? It was like, what was that? Zhang Hok Yao. It was Zhang Hok Yao, and then it was Wong Fei. These are great songs, but we haven't heard these for 20, 30 years, right? So what's going on? There is a kind of wave of nostalgia at the moment. I don't know how far is there any signs of this wave in Vancouver? Or it's coming. Probably, well, maybe they never went out of fashion in Vancouver. Who knows? Or alternatively, the nostalgia wave may be coming your way anytime soon. And this is last week's news talking about Generation Z falling in love with Cantonese from the 1980s, which is literally before they were born, right? So it is a little bit like in England, the Beatles come back into fashion from time to time, even if one wasn't alive at the time. So that's what happened, and they're saying, what is it? Cantonese oldies are reaching into my heart and lungs. So it's one of the quotes from Gingzi Cantopop enthusiasts, right? So it's an example of this, whatever it is about the Cantopop, whether it's the melody matching or whatever, has a lasting aesthetic value that people appreciate. So here are some of the people that are reappearing. There is some talk of a golden age of Cantopop, golden age, these singers attributed to the golden age. Danny Chan is the one we just heard most of his song. Zheng Hok Yao John Gok Wang and Fei Wong and Meekin Mui and beyond. And we apologize if your favorite performers are not here. They may well be coming back into fashion if you watch this space. Yeah. There's another kind of nostalgia, which again is recently come to our attention. I don't know how new it is, but it's recently come to our attention. And that is restaurants catering to this nostalgia for the golden age. So this is a restaurant, so you can't quite see the trolleys here, but what I think they advertise the fact that they use the old dim sum trolleys that people got to see these in restaurant or anything like that, because in Hong Kong that for some reason that basically disappeared. You can order things on their phone or something. Yeah, lost the character of the original dim sum culture, which is you see things coming by in the trolleys, which is it. And it's actually kind of important because I belatedly realized that dim sum is at its best when it's piping hot, right? So it needs to be straight, or whenever it's straight out of the kitchen, you grab it and eat it immediately, okay, at its best, okay. So that's like the draw for the customers, is the fresh dim sum from the trolleys. But when you go into the restaurant, this is Mongkok, you're confronted with this. Does anybody recognize this? This is a movie poster advertising the comedies of Hui Gunman, and this is also kind of nostalgic for me because I learned a lot of Cantonese from his movies when they were new in the 80s and 90s, so they seemed quite fun at the time. The Hui brothers were a very talented group of siblings, produced movies, and Sam Hui was the singer. Also, there were two of their classic movies there. And also in the restaurant, they've got this. Now, what is this? Anybody recognize? This is street art, graffiti, by the most famous graffiti artist of Hong Kong, who was Deng Zhuozhai. It's a distinctive style and content. I don't know much about this, but Professor Helena Wu is here at UBC, and she's there. But so Professor Wu has studied the graffiti of the King of Kowloon, as he was known, and it used to be possible to find his graffiti around town. I suspect it no longer is, right? Is there any originals still around? They'll probably all be painted over, but they are reproduced as an object of nostalgia. So there's a wave of nostalgia coming through. Maybe it will hit you soon. So it's an object of nostalgia. It's also an object of concern. So I mean, is Cantonese language and culture endangered? Lots of people are asking this. One time the BBC even asked me this, and it became an issue. And at first sight, it seems a strange idea, right? Because we have, according to this estimate, 85 million speakers of Yue dialects. That's the dialect which includes Cantonese, and it's hard to say where Cantonese ends and other Yue dialects begin, so there isn't really a right answer to that. But let's assume that's correct. It's something like saying that there are 80 million speakers of Cantonese. So how could the language be endangered? Number of ways that it could be endangered. So Robert Bauer again has pointed this out, that if we look in Guangzhou, in fact some of you were telling me this before the talk, that in Guangzhou it's very common to encounter children of Cantonese-speaking families who don't speak Cantonese. They might understand some, but they don't speak it, and if they don't speak it, most likely they won't be passing it on to their next generation, right? And this is how you lose. This is what we call language shift, and this is partly driven by media, but partly driven by media instruction in the schools, right? Again, in Hong Kong. You've got both views. Some serious scholars have written, don't be ridiculous, Cantonese is the dominant language of Hong Kong, always will be, etc. And there are others who say, actually, it's vulnerable. That was my conclusion after looking at the language endangerment scale, that it is vulnerable. Why? Because I think we all know instances of families where the children don't speak Cantonese and the parents do. Right? It is easy to find such people. They exist. There might not be a lot of them, but they certainly exist, and therefore language shift is happening, at least in some families. Right? And the medium of instruction has been changing quite rapidly. So to teach Chinese literacy, there were lots of reasons to do it through Putonghua. Well, once you do that, then you're shifting the balance of languages, right? And then maybe some kids or some classes will end up using more Putonghua than Cantonese, and then Cantonese could be on its way out in that family. So here, I always bring up Celia. Celia is here teaching Cantonese, and Celia's MA thesis in Hong Kong was a very insightful study where she compared the very last set the last class of students learning through Cantonese with the very first class of students learning Chinese through Putonghua, and she documented the changes or the differences between those two cohorts, and there were some immediate effects. So. She found that children were beginning to use Putonghua in the playground, which I think at one point would have been unheard of, right? But say the 1990s, it was probably unheard of, so it was a big deal when it started. And perhaps more interestingly, Celia found through questionnaires that even families with no Mandarin speakers in the family were using some Mandarin at home. Perhaps it came from the children's homework or something like that, or the various ways that the children brought Mandarin home. So most of us say there's nothing wrong with bringing Mandarin home, but some of the things there might be something wrong with this. So a number of schools have been telling people, you're not allowed to speak Cantonese, and for a linguist that's a red light, right? Because one of the ways to kill a language is to say it's not allowed, right? And unfortunately, I don't know a lot about the First Nations experience, but I understand that was part of the First Nations experience in Canada and the US, that you were not allowed to speak your language, and I don't think any linguist would support that kind of language policy. And it's fine to have a language policy, but a language policy that prohibits speaking a language is quite problematic. When the BBC asks me, or when journalists ask me about this, I generally say that I think in the long term, language shift is in progress. So Cantonese is in decline. It depends where you are. So if you're in Guangzhou, it's very obvious. Some of you are telling me in Richmond, it's quite obvious. In Hong Kong, it's generally less obvious, but I still think you can see it happening if you look in the right places. There's a long term language shift in progress. Here's just an anecdotal example. Recently, we were having dinner at Kowloon City, and we overheard this conversation. The parent says, Nathan, Nathan's sit here in Cantonese, and the child replies, I want to sit with mummy. Right? A little bit later, the child says, after we meet, we can play again, and the parent says, more energy. So you can see there's a kind of dialogue going on with the kids speaking English and the parents speaking Cantonese, as if it was completely normal. I think it is completely normal in many families, but then in such a family, it's quite imaginable that the next generation of kids will be passive speakers, right? Which is they will, as we say in Cantonese, will be understanding but not speaking. So here's Robert Bauer again, making the point that he was interviewed about this topic, and he said Hong Kong's future is in the hands of young people. If you think Cantonese is important, then there are ways that they can support transmission. They're not interested, Cantonese will soon disappear. And another case that I didn't mention is there are families that have explicitly given up on Cantonese, right? That decided that, we want the child to be best at English, or we want the child to win the Putonghua recital competition or something, and they think that the way to do that is to get rid of Cantonese. Right? So my wife, some of you disagree, my wife would definitely disagree with that prescription. But I mean, there are families where it's another way in which Cantonese could disappear in each families or social groups. So do the young people care? Well, they do. This is the great Pokemon controversy. I think anybody remembers this. BBC actually called me up about this and said, what's going on? Like, why are these Hong Kong people demonstrating outside the Japanese embassy, carrying placards of Pikachu Pokemon? What's going on here? So I tried to explain that it gave a long explanation to the BBC, and they tried to put it into one line of their report, put it into one sentence. Anyway, we tried to explain what was going on. This is the most famous of the Pokemons, named Pikachu, right? And its Japanese name is Pikachu. Well, what's its Cantonese name? Well, its Cantonese name conventionally is Pikachu, which is close enough to recognizably Pikachu, like it's that guy. But the makers of the Pokemons, Nintendo, decided that they were going to standardize their terminology, that any kind of Chinese was going to use this expression, the Mandarin expression, which is Pikachu, which is okay if you're speaking Mandarin, right? But if you're speaking Cantonese, then this character expression is going to be read as Pekayao, and Pekayao is not Pikachu. No, we don't want Pekayao, we want Pikachu, right? So that is the debate, right? So what I tried to explain to because it seems very trivial, but from the fact that we're demonstrating, there must be something deeper underlying this, right? And what was underlying this was the fear of having Putonghua imposed on you, even in your favorite game or favorite video games, which you might think it would be a case where you could go on speaking Cantonese, thank you, but no. So that's the great Pokemon controversy. So that brings us to children and the case of the heritage child, and Virginia is going to take over with the case of the heritage child.
So the second part of the talk is about the heritage child. So I'll say something about heritage languages, and then the cover that we had released, and then introduce a case study. And then the question is, can we reverse the language shift? So we see this happen a lot on the heritage children sort of undergo a language shift from Cantonese to English, and maybe some of them even, don't speak the language anymore. But can this be reversed? So Canada, in particular, Vancouver, has seen waves of immigration from Hong Kong and Guangzhou, China, among many other countries. The children of Cantonese-speaking immigrant families will become heritage speakers of Cantonese. 2 different degrees will refer to these children as heritage children. So they typically grow up in an environment where a language such as Cantonese is spoken in the home, but it's not the language of the wider society. Here's a definition of heritage language: the first language of second-generation children born to first-generation parents outside of the home country. The heritage language is spoken in the home, but it's not a dominant language in the society. So the language is acquired in a naturalistic way rather than through formal instruction in the first few years of life. Acquiring a heritage language does not mean only acquiring that language in a monolingual setting, but it necessarily happens in a bilingual or multilingual setting. The children concerned will be growing up bilingual, if not multilingual. So bilingual children are the key to maintaining the heritage of Cantonese, and to ensure transmission of Cantonese culture from generation to generation, we need to bring up children bilingually as bearers of the language and culture. So several studies have been carried out on Cantonese as a heritage language in Vancouver. So one by Zoe Lam here. So she got a PhD from here. She studied young adult heritage speakers of Cantonese and found that heritage speakers tended to merge the two rising tones, the tone 2 and 5. But so did the homeland speakers in Hong Kong. So for example, if you have mei gok si, right, meaning American history, and mei gok si, so American stock market, they don't distinguish between these two. A recent study by Lan Chen in collaboration with Molly Babel's lab at UBC focused on young heritage children aged between 2 and 6. And surprisingly, she found that the heritage children had less of a tendency to merge the rising tones than the homeland children in Hong Kong. So let's take a look at the tone contours of the two groups of children. So both groups show distinct contours for the 6 tones, but there's a difference. The heritage children's tones are even more closely packed than the homeland children. So we might expect them to make fewer distinctions. For example, we can see that the 2 rising tones are quite close together, but they are actually less likely to merge the 2 than homeland children. The heritage children show less of a tendency to merge the rising tones than the homeland children, and Lan Chen suggests that this is because the heritage children's input is less likely to merge the tones than input in the homeland, where the merging tones, tone merger is an ongoing sound change. And having acquired the tone system in childhood and the ability to distinguish the tones, this is a big advantage for heritage children. This is a head start over adult second language learners in terms of phonology. Heritage speakers sound much more native than even the most proficient and advanced L2 learners. So they show a more conservative tone system than homeland children. At our lab at CHA, we created a number of child language corpora. So many years ago, we built the Hong Kong Bilingual Child Language Corpus, which was the basis for our book, The Bilingual Child. And more recently, we launched the tone corpus of monolingual Mandarin and Child Heritage Chinese corpus, which we'll look at in a moment. So the director of Child, Professor Brian McGooney, pointed out that CHK holds the record for producing the largest corpora documenting bilingual and trilingual acquisition. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the innovative and stunning contributions of Maggie Mai, who is featured on this slide. She was the one leading a big team of research assistants and student helpers and coming up with ingenious research ideas and methodological innovations. So when we held a press conference upon the launch of the Child Heritage Chinese Corpus, the media highlighted a few key points. In particular, learning English need not be at the expense of learning Chinese. You don't need to sacrifice Chinese in order to learn English. So this is just a summary of all the recent released corpora. So in this table, you can see 4 children's data, background information, etc. So since we're running out of time, I'll just skip over some of the information. So we're going to look at Winston because he's the one exposed to Cantonese. You'll notice that apart from input from his mother, he was actually getting a lot of input from the grandparents. So I really want to pay tribute to the grandparents. How many grandparents here, by the way? Thank you. So they actually provide a lot of Mandarin as well as Cantonese. So in fact, a lot more Cantonese input, and that is the key to the success of this family. because well, this was in Seattle, there were a lot more Mandarin speakers than Cantonese speakers. So the mother was really worried that Winston's Cantonese would be lagging behind. But thanks to the input from the grandparents, so they had FaceTime and regular interactions. And you can also see that Winston went to bilingual school and even this quadrilingual program. So these schools were really carefully chosen by the mother. Okay, so we realize how important it is, to have a strong sense of identity. In Cantonese, it's 身份認同. So you really want to be proud of your heritage in order to want to pass on this heritage. So for this family, the mothers in particular, so listen to what she has to say. I am Cantonese from Guangzhou. It's my unshakable responsibility to pass on my language as part of our culture to the next generation, and this is an identity issue. So in Chinese, it's 責無旁貸. So this is a great expression in Cantonese, very hard to translate. So basically, it means that you cannot delegate this responsibility to somebody else. So this is just to let you listen to Winston's 3 languages. So the point we're trying to make is that in order to pass on Cantonese heritage, you don't just focus on Cantonese per se. In fact, young children have the amazing ability to acquire more than, or at least 2, if not 3, or more. So this is a very convincing case because we have followed him for a number of years, and you will be amazed because he's so fluent in all 3 languages.
Hello, my name is Winston Virginia 5歲。
大家好，我係 Winston 同 Pascal 嘅媽媽。
你啊？喂呀，邊陣時候啊？
雖然我哋而家喺美國住，不過我係廣州人。我自細就同屋企人講廣州話，即係粵語。粵語對我哋屋企嚟講好重要，佢唔單止係一種語言，仲係一種文化、一種傳統，同埋一種我好希望同我哋嘅子孫後代分享嘅生活方式。
我同媽媽講廣東話。
嗱，紅蘿，再咧。
呢個媽媽買嘅，雖然花除我把我香要喺屋企。
係啦。
Winston 學廣東話其實特別困難，因為而家市面上俾小朋友學英文嘅材料真係好豐富、好吸引、好多選擇，但係學粵語，特別係粵語口語嘅就幾乎冇咁滯。所以如果香港可以喺呢方面做多啲嘢，我覺得會好受家長歡迎。
I'll just skip over some parts. So when we compare Winston's Cantonese to the homeland Cantonese-speaking children, we were very amazed and we were it's kind of rewarding to see that his Cantonese actually outperformed the homeland child. So the green line is Winston and the red is another age-matched child. And then the Mandarin slightly behind the monolingual, but catching up by 3 years old. And earlier we discussed how the germ construction was a feature of ancient or earlier Chinese and earlier Cantonese. So this is a beautiful sentence produced by Winston. So 我想你將嗰個蓋放返去呢度。So for 3-year-old child. This is kind of amazing. And not just for, I mean, he can do very complex things, not just in one language, but in all of the 3 languages. And we were interested in the percentage of the gerund construction. By the way, this is the equivalent of the ba construction in Mandarin. So there's a high percentage of gerund constructions, 38 tokens, 1.19% of total Cantonese utterances. And we think it has to do with the high frequency in the mother's input. And then there's also, the effect, the influence from Mandarin Ba, because it's a lot more frequent in Mandarin. That is the counterpart of the gerund construction. So actually, he's benefiting from learning Mandarin at the same time. So another fun thing that we like to talk about in Scopus is how effortlessly he was switching from one language to the next. So in this sentence, you can hear words from 3 languages in the same sentence. So you're going to listen to this. So he started with Zhongwen, which is Mandarin, and then switching to Cantonese, 可能講唔到, and then English. Kitchen.
中文係咩啊？咩係 kitchen？
我佢哋唔知中文可能講唔到 kitchen。
So there's a trendy term called translanguaging. So he's doing it so well, so beautifully. He also shows amazing metalinguistic awareness at the age of 3. So you see, he hypothesizes there's a lexical gap so that Chinese doesn't have a word for kitchen. So this is a good reason to use a word from another language to fill a gap. And here's another surprise. We found that when Winston mixes his languages, his speech is more complex. We use the standard measure of mean length of utterance, which means mean length, average number of words per sentence. So basically, it's the number of words in a sentence in the transcript. So in Cantonese, he scores 4, which is more than his English. But when he mixes his languages, his MLU score is 5. That is significantly higher than when he speaks one language at a time. And we found this pattern consistently in the bilingual and trilingual children we've studied longitudinally using our corpora. And here's an implication for parents, which is, don't worry about your child mixing languages, and don't try to discourage it. You might be preventing the child from expressing herself in more complex terms. So by pooling the resources from languages she knows, the child can express more complex ideas.
Okay, I have one more case study to talk about because it's a hopeful one. This reminds you of the importance of the grandparents. So we're going to see that in the we see that in the Winston case and in the next case as well. There's a general pattern of language shift, which we talked about before, that there is language shift clearly going on in Guangzhou, meaning that families are, over the generations, moving from Cantonese to Putonghua. And the model of this from Fishman is that you have a first generation of native speakers, the second generation of bilingual speakers, and a third generation who only speak the new language, whether it's the language of the country you've emigrated to or whatever. That's the traditional model from Fishman, which is 3 generations. But there are a lot of cases where that happens within 2 generations that can be remarkably fast. always think this is very sad because what that means is that the children cannot talk to their grandparents, basically cannot communicate with their grandparents, so it's quite a big deal. Here is a more hopeful case study. This is a family growing up in the USA across 3 generations. These are pseudonyms. The family, but they ask you not to take pictures of the family. So that's the second generation parents and their 2 children from the 3rd generation. Right? Now, the issue is with the second generation parents, because they are ABC, born and raised in America, went to English language schools and college. They did have some weekend classes, like many heritage speakers, right? But they didn't have much, didn't use, well, they did at home. They used quite a lot of they use both Mandarin and English, but at work they only used in English. And when they met each other, so the parents, both parents from a similar background as heritage speakers of Chinese, of Mandarin, they communicated with each other only in English, right? So 2 heritage speakers, they decide, as it were, to communicate in English, and so what's happening to their Chinese, right? That's the question. And so for some years they weren't really using Chinese, but when they started having children, they realized there's a problem. They don't speak Chinese anymore, and their next generation was not going to speak Chinese. So what do? They were motivated to get their Chinese back, right? So Chinese was slipping in a little, or tending to, they were not using it anymore. It was probably undergoing the kind of changes that are typical for heritage speakers. And they made a conscious effort to use more Chinese to their kids, right? Why did they do this? Well, partly for the identity issues that Virginia just discussed, but interestingly, they also discovered the bilingual advantage. If you heard of the bilingual advantage, so that around this time it became not exactly popular, but was it The Economist started talking about it, and serious newspapers started talking about the advantages of, cognitive advantages of bilingualism. So they became aware of that. It was an additional, in addition to preserving the Chinese heritage, there was the prospect of the children having, enjoying the bilingual advantage or advantages. So they made an effort to get Chinese versions of Peppa Pig, for example. There seems to be a magic tool of Peppa Pig. They brought in the grandparents, and typically the grandparents are not on site. They may be a long way away, but nowadays that doesn't matter because you can get them on FaceTime or Zoom or something. You have a regular chat to your grandparents. And they set a minimum of 5 hours to week talking to the grandparents, which is something nice in terms of contact between the generations, but also crucial to their language acquisition, as Virginia was saying, because the grandparents typically are most comfortable speaking Mandarin in this case, right? So there was a real motivation for children to use Mandarin with them. So here they are teaching literacy to their children in preschool age, taking the children on trips and making it, I don't know if it's Chinese food, but making it a rule that we go on a trip and we speak Chinese on the trip. So with the first child, they managed, I think, with some difficulty, managed to speak enough Chinese to the first child to that he was his Peppa Pig. In the case of the second pregnancy, they actually started reading Chinese before the child was born, and you may think that's a bit silly, but according to research, it's not silly at all. So it's quite another one of these interesting I like to say language is not common sense. It's not at all obvious that it would be any use to tell stories in Chinese before the child is born, but it turns out it is. Right? Why? Because of the child is hearing, the child is picking up the intonation pattern or the tone or something before the child is born. And again, they became aware of that. And they developed a language policy, so the second generation parents had a policy of only speaking Chinese to each other in front of the children and insisting that Chinese was the language of the home, and the kind of politeness or respect for the grandparents is that you talk their language, right? You don't expect, so they would say things like this to their children. How do you say that to grandma in Chinese? One of those issues is, which we get asked a lot, is what if the children are mixing language? What do I do? Right? So Virginia always said, no, you don't stop them. Don't try to stop them mixing languages, but you can take the opportunity to reformulate, to give them the Chinese words. So if the child says, 我很喜欢 bubbles, you can say, 对, yes, you're quite right. 你很喜欢泡泡, so you can give them the Chinese word without telling them off for using the English word. That's the general recommendation, and that's what they did. The second generation parents had been losing their Chinese, but they were able to reverse this process. They increased their use of Chinese enormously, and they learned a lot of vocabulary and other things that they didn't know before. And we know this because one of the grandparents is a Chinese teacher and gave them these standardized tests, right? So grandmother gave her children the standardized tests, and were able to demonstrate the progression from intermediate high to advanced mid. So there was progress even at, we don't know what age they were exactly, but obviously post-college age children were still able to progress this level. And this is some of the conclusions they drew. They became more confident about using Chinese. Didn't expect the Chinese to improve after all these years, but it did, right, given this motivation. They have understood various advantages of keeping the heritage language going. Had memorable experiences doing things together in Chinese, and then there's the prospect that they will pass this on to the next generation. So this is quite a nice success story, we think. It requires dedication to the task, but we saw that also with Winston's family. Seems to be working, it can work. We do recommend a family language policy in such cases, so there's various elements of family language policy in here, right? And if you're interested, you can get books about raising bilingual children that talk about family language policy. So we've gone on rather longer than we intended, but we've tried to show some points about the Cantonese heritage, so the culture which comes with the Cantonese language. It links you to the Chinese, the Tang Dynasty, and the rest of Chinese history. The way that the music is sort of inspired or deriving from properties of the tones of the language. We try to show that language shift is not inevitable in a heritage language context, but bilingual children are critical in reversing, in that case, the language shift to the parents. The grandparents turn out to play a crucial role in both of those case studies. The language shift which seemed to be happening at the point that those two heritage speakers married, like they were not using Chinese anymore, and it was looking like the next generation would be monolingual English, but because of those various realizations, they were able to reverse the process of language shift. So for us, the bilingual children are the keepers of their country's heritage. We've seen cases where heritage language can be successfully translated in bilingual or trilingual contexts. And among these contexts, actually, Vancouver is a particularly privileged context. It's relatively easy. Well, I don't want to say it's easy, it isn't, but it's relatively possible in this context just because of the amount of speakers and the amount of material and media and so on that's available. If all else fails, you can always come to the Cantonese program, BBC, to improve your Cantonese, right? Or your Mandarin. Oh, thank you to our lab, especially Maggie Mai for leading the heritage study, and a lot of graduate students and helpers, as you know, we've seen from your labs here. We all seem to be girls, so there are one or two guys here and there, but mostly girls. And we believe in saying thank you in as many languages as possible.
All right, once again, thank you to both honorable speakers sharing their expertise, and this can, personally, this came more timely because it's really relevant to my own research right now. I'm writing on heritage learners of Cantonese here in Canada. My advisor is here. So thank you, and I think we don't have too much time for question and answer, but we still want to engage. So if you don't mind, because we did start a few minutes late, right? So we will go a few minutes into 8 o'clock-ish. So yeah, please feel free to raise your hand for any questions or comments for our two speakers, and then we have volunteers who will pass the mic to you. So we open the floor to you for any questions or comments for our two speakers. Any questions?
We'd really like to hear from you.
Yeah, or your reaction, response to what was shared here. Yeah, over there.
Hi, sorry, I was just curious about how they measured complexity in the code mixing. How was that quantified? I didn't understand what MLUW was, and I'm from the linguistic.
Sorry, yes. We skipped over to rather. It means mean length of utterance, and utterance is basically a sentence, so it's a technical definition, but basically the number of words per sentence. You may say that's a rather crude measure. I think it is a rather crude measure. Other people have used some more quantitative measures of complexity. For example, how many different verbs the kid uses, that would be maybe another measure of complexity. Did you have anything in mind, or were you just puzzled what that meant?
Just puzzled, yeah.
Okay. I think so. Basically, the number of words per sentence. It is crude, but in terms of ordinary children, not ordinary, but one-language children, monolingual children, although it's crude, it has been shown to correlate quite well with the development of more sophisticated language knowledge. So it's become a standard measure of language development for that reason.
Hi, this is kind of more personal. I just want to ask you. Oh, sorry. You were speaking earlier that as learning Cantonese as a second language, that there are, I don't know if you said there were certain tones or certain things that are tough for you. Could you tell me what those are?
Well, I said in William's class that to me the most difficult thing of Cantonese is and always has been tones, right? So you maybe notice that I can lecture about the tones quite authoritatively, but when I'm speaking, I will make all kinds of mistakes. In fact, she has to correct, well, she doesn't correct me a lot, but she's got used to it, so it doesn't bother, but I make all kinds of errors. There was one study done by one of my students. She found that when I was asked explicitly to do a task and pronounce things correctly, I could do so. But when she just recorded me